was she'd slap me and knock me out.
For over 7 years, he had been to this same mountain to hunt, and he was pretty good at it. But one day, he met with another ferocious hunter. But this time, he was the prey.
She's gonna come back and kill me, I know that.
Lee Brooke is a 61-year-old hunter, and for over 4 decades, he had been in and out of the Wyoming mountains. Now don't be mistaken, the Wyoming mountain, despite how beautiful it is also extremely dangerous. You could meet your death at any point in time, but after a long time of evading danger, Lee was not too scared. He would go up to the mountains with his rifle and hunt for hours, searching for the perfect prey. October 1st, 2016 was one of those days. With his rifle in hand, he ventured into the forest. Finding a good kill could take a few hours, even a few days, but today was his lucky day. Or was it? As dusk fell on that very day, after hours and hours of careful searching, Lee finally found the perfect elk. He smiled to himself, then slowly grabbed his rifle, took aim, and sent his bullet flying. It hit the elk right in the sides, but it tried to run away. However, after running a few yards, the prey eventually succumbed to its wounds and died. But sadly, it was already too dark for Lee to see the elk or even carry it with him. So he decided to come back for it the following day. Unknown to him, this would be the worst decision of his life. The following morning, when Lee made it out to the Wyoming mountains, it all looked normal to him, like any other day. But today was different. Today, the hunter was about to become the prey. When he went back to where he'd hunted the night before, he found the elk right where he left it. But before he could move closer, he felt something inside him say to wait, even though there was nothing physical stopping him. Strange, he thought to himself. He looked around for a bit. Nothing was out of place, so he figured he was just being paranoid. He then shrugged and proceeded towards the elk. But when he got there, he noticed something quite odd, something unusual. The elk was still dead, but it was turned over. He could have sworn that he didn't leave the elk like this.
I walked up to it. I didn't get too close, but I got close enough to see that it had been turned over and covered with brush.
His eyes then widened as a sudden realization dawned on him.
Because I realized what I'd been forgetting all morning is that bear on the mountain, and a bear had claimed the kill.
He took a quick survey in his mind. He had come to the woods with a couple of his hunter friends. They had guns with them, but all he had was a knife in his hand. There was no other human in sight. That could only mean that it was an animal that was here last. A deadly predator. As soon as he realized, he tried to step away from the dead elk, but sadly, it was too late. The next few moments caught Lee extremely by surprise. Before he could take 2 steps, he felt something around him. He looked over his shoulder and sure enough, a 6-foot bear was running towards him. In the bear's mind, Lee was toying with his kill, and he would not have it. He tried to run, but before he could take a few steps, the bear had caught up with him and instantly knocked him out cold.
She had grabbed my backpack and jerked me off my feet. She had slapped me and knocked me out.
For a while, all he could see was darkness. He felt nothing and was completely unaware of what was going on. Perhaps he may have been better off that way because after a few minutes, Lee suddenly jerked back to consciousness. And once he realized he was still in danger, he froze on the spot as the beast stopped its attack and came close to him, sniffing, checking to see if he was dead. Lee could feel the whiskers of the deadly bear on his cheek. He could feel its nose nestling against his skin.
And that's where I woke up. And she was sniffing me on the cheek and Whiskers were right here in my ear.
Lee knew he couldn't lay here for too long. Sooner or later, the bear would realize he was still alive and destroy him. But what could he do? Suddenly, a small voice in his mind began to tell him to fight back. He needed to fight back. And that was when he remembered the knife in his hand. So in a burst of adrenaline, he raised his hand against the bear's neck and tried to push it back. The bear growled and fought back, but there was too much adrenaline coursing through Lee's veins. He pushed back and then slowly got up to his feet. Again, the beast swiped at him, its powerful claws tearing at the skin on the man's face. Lee didn't let that stop him. He knew one thing: if he stopped fighting back now, he's as good as dead. He gripped the knife harder, then proceeded to stab the bear in its head as many times as he could. The bear growled again. It was a vicious assault, but Lee was doing it. He was fighting back. By now, the man was in pain. His face was bloody and he couldn't see well. The bear had really done a number on him, but he needed to kill it once and for all. It was the only way he could survive this. Finally, the bear stopped its assault and ran the other way to nurse its wounds. But Lee was no fool. He knew all too well that bears didn't die that easily, and soon the beast would come back to finish him once and for all. He needed to get out of here. But how? He was badly injured. He couldn't call for help. He was the only human for several miles. He needed to save himself, or he'll be as good as the elk that lay lifeless a few yards away. Lee fell to the ground and tried to catch his breath. He was weak, tired, and in pain, but he still knew there was something not quite right with him. He just couldn't put his finger on it. Finally, he figured it was time to move away from here before the bear got back to kill him. But he had to do an inventory of all his stuff. First, he glanced to his right and could see his backpack all crumpled up due to the tussle with the bear. That made sense, he thought. But even he couldn't believe what he saw next. He looked to his right and saw something quite strange lying on the ground. He squinted a little bit more and looked closer, and he couldn't believe what he was gazing on. It was his left nostril sitting on the floor with half of his mustache still attached to it.
And on the right side was, that's my nose and my mustache on the ground.
That was when he felt his nose and realized it was a gaping hole, filled with so much blood he could pass out any time soon. As terrible as this was, he didn't have time to stay and lament, so he picked up his nose and stuffed it in his pocket, then got back on his feet and began roaming around. He was way too far from town now and far from his friends and fellow hunters, but he needed to be out on the open grounds so the bear didn't return and find him there. So he walked back to the direction he was coming from. His feet were heavy, he was staggering, losing a lot of blood, but he had a wife he loved, and he would do anything to see her again, and so he fought to survive.
And I know I'm not going to get myself out of this one. I know I'm going to need help. There's no help on the mountain, but I cannot leave these dense, dark woods with a bear behind me. I've got to find a high ground.
After a while, he found a tree and then walked up to it, with his back against it. He tried to call for help again, but it was useless. No one was within earshot. Lee was worried and scared now. Will he make it? Will the bear find him again? At the end of the day, Lee waited in the mountains, alone and fighting for his life for about 5 whole hours before his hunter friends found him. He was barely conscious, within an inch of his life. On top of all that, it took 7 hours before they could get him to the hospital, and the doctors were still shocked to see that he was alive. He was put in an induced coma and made to undergo dozens of surgeries. His face may never be the same again, but at least he made it out alive. However, that day, on October 1st, 2016, his life took a new turn. It was a day he would never forget. If you think this story was terrifying, you should check out this next one.